Great, thanks. If we can take our seats, we'll go ahead and get started. We're running just a little bit behind time, so I want to be efficient so we can get to lunch. We all enjoyed the first two panels today, and we're going to wrap up with probably the toughest issue that we're facing here in California water management, and that is the management of our grid. First of all, I want to tell you we have a terrific panel here today, and I really just want you to go to the bios that we have in the packet for you. But we've got Jason Phillips, who's the CEO, who has the easiest job in the Central Valley as CEO of the Friant Water Authority. We have Jennifer Peer, who's sitting here next to him, who has the second easiest job, and that's the head of the state water contractors. That's right. We have Kurt Aiken, who's a complete slacker at the Yuba, formerly known as the Yuba County Water Agency, to the rest of us now as the Yuba Water Agency, formerly known. And we have Ashley Bourne with Sustainable Conservation, who has the hardest job in the valley. There we go. I got all of those. So go ahead and take a look at their bios. This last September, we released a report here at PPIC where we took a look at climate of the future, on droughts of the future, and we basically tried to simplify an incredibly, which is what we do here at PPIC, simplify an incredibly complex problem by saying really there's 5 climate pressures that are working on California, and those 5 climate pressures that Ellen outlined in her opening talk, which are basically increases in temperature, the changes in snow, and especially the rain-snow mix and the timing of snowmelt, this phenomenon that we are seeing real time in front of us, which is changing seasonality, that our falls and our springs are longer and warmer and drier. Indeed, that may be the signature that's driving so much of our fire conditions now, that it's extending them so much. And then, of course, the climate volatility that we're seeing, and my God, you have to have been asleep not to have noticed that in the last 6 or 7 years, where we go from extraordinary drought to extraordinary wet to hopefully not back into extraordinary drought, all of it with incredibly high temperatures. And then the part we haven't talked about at all today, hasn't even been mentioned, but is important, and that's rising sea level. And that rising sea level is playing a really important role in coastal aquifers, as well, of course, as the delta. Also something that's hardly been mentioned today, which I thought was rather surprising, but we'll take care of that. And what we did, based on that, and we assembled some scientists, and we put together basically a list of reforms. And Ellen covered those, and I want to remind them because this is germane to everything we're talking about here. And that is that you got a plan. I mean, we came to the conclusion that even all sectors can be improved by better planning, and that is to anticipate changes and as well as set priorities. We talked about modernizing the grid, which is going to be our focus today, and that isn't just making new canals, new dams, new groundwater basins, but basically how we operate them. We talked about upgrading the way we allocate water. We identified a number of problems in the way we allocate water and the way we divide up the pie or prevent good things from happening. You heard a lot about that in the first two panels. And then the last was, to quote Cuba Gooding, show me the money. So the money is an issue, and we cannot ignore that. Proposition 3, the defeat of Proposition 3, that's a big deal. So what we're going to do in this panel is we're going to focus on 2 aspects of this, and this is the modernizing of the water grid. And when I say modernizing the water grid, I'm talking about taking that mix of surface storage, groundwater storage, conveyance systems, and how we operate it, and operating it more as a grid, analogous to but not the same as the electrical grid, and how we modernize that, not just the operation, but the physical features themselves. So that includes everything from water markets to trading, or trading, for example, the way we allocate water, water rights system, that's all got to be modernized to basically adapt to these droughts of the future, and of course the floods that seem to come with them, or usually right after them. So that's what we're going to focus on the first half of our discussion, and the second half of our discussion is sorry, Joaquin, you are not the 800-pound gorilla. The 800-pound gorilla is how to pay for all this stuff. So we're going to spend the latter part of our time discussing how to pay for it. So I want to start off with the easiest job in the valley, which is Jason's job, Friant Water Authority, and go to you. And I want to encourage our panelists to go look at what we really want to look at is vulnerabilities and opportunities in improving this grid and how we're going to do it. And you are at ground zero in a system that's going to have to basically make a major cut in the amount of water they have, and an existing infrastructure, which, as I remember, was originally designed to do conjunctive use programs, but how to somehow beef those up. So I actually want to hear your views on your grid and the kinds of things that you need to do within your grid to basically improve its performance.
Sure, and first I want to say thank you to PPIC for having me. Just speaking from Friant's perspective, we've seen a lot of good work in the last few years come out of PPIC's Water Policy Center. It's very encouraging to see more analysis on the problem we're dealing with, and not just us with our violins in the San Joaquin Valley, but let's look at the numbers. And this is one of my more difficult jobs, but I've also, if you look at my bio, I was the manager of the Klamath Basin project for a while.
Piece of cake.
Before that was the San Joaquin River Restoration Program manager. So way back when I was with the Corps of Engineers too. So I've been trying to find sort of that fit that I can just sort of kick back, and so far this has not been it. So I'm going to answer the question a couple ways, because one is the grid as I view it from the Friant Division. And the Friant Division was really established as one of the first really major conjunctive use projects in California. And it was constructed at a time when, after several decades in the late 1800s and early 1900s, farmers had settled in the San Joaquin Valley, found that it was a very, very nice place for agriculture, but there wasn't necessarily enough water there, and there was very much an over-reliance on groundwater. And in the 20s and 30s was the development of the Central Valley Project, which started with Friant Dam. And it really it's functioned a lot as it was intended, which was, let's capture surface water, deliver it 30 miles north. So Friant Dam, if you're not familiar, is in just north of Fresno. It has a canal that goes north called the Madera Canal, 30 miles, and then south of Fresno, 152 miles all the way to Bakersfield. And it just traverses all kinds of county boundaries and political boundaries, and which makes my job a lot more fun. But it really added 1 million acre-feet of surface water to recharge groundwater in those years when it was available. And in those years, drought years, when it's not, then most of the ag community there in the Friant Division can pull water out of the ground. And much of the districts that have contracts with Friant, I think, are going to be able to make the right investments and survive probably better than a lot of others in this Sigma world that we're living in. But I want to also talk about other aspects of the San Joaquin Valley. Our neighbors, some of the growers that I work for, also have land outside the Friant Division. And it's a much different picture when you just look at the San Joaquin Valley as a whole. When you look to go to DWR's website on Sigma, look at the groundwater overdraft map, and where it shows red for critically overdrafted. It's the San Joaquin Valley. That's where it is. And it's not new. It's not like, oh, last 10 years, a whole bunch of new agriculture came in. Look, if you go back to 1981, I pulled out a study from the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm going to bring up some really politically incorrect projects because it was in the report, but it's just to make a point that in 1981, they finished a study on a mid-valley canal, when the idea was going to be take water from the delta and enlarge the Delta-Mendota Canal to bring water to Mendota Pool and bring it up to San Joaquin Valley and Madera, Tulare counties, where there's still a lot of overdraft. And in the report, it said there is currently 1 million acre-feet of overdraft in the valley, and this is after Friant Division was built, after San Luis Unit Division was built, and both at about 100% allocations every year. There's 1 million acre-feet, and by 2020, we project it'll be at 1.5 million acre-feet per year overdraft. And this project made a lot of sense when we were designing it, but it relied on Auburn Dam and the Peripheral Canal, both of which are not going forward. So there is still a way to get some benefits. We project, even without those, there's about 500,000 acre-feet a year of yield. And then in the preface of the report, it said, right before we released this, the Bureau of Reclamation agreed to new standards by the state board, which decimated all the benefits of this project. So we decided to put the report out, but it has zero benefit, so, you know, until such time as there's water available. So that was 1981, projecting 1.5 million acre feet of average annual overdraft in the valley, right up near the Friant Division. And what has happened since then? Well, really nothing except for as environmental laws have gotten more strict and more water has gone out to outflow, that 1.5 million acre feet per year overdraft projection has actually grown quite a bit. At least we're thinking 2.5 million. We're about to release a new study that we're doing that shows it might be upwards to 4 million. So the problem is not one that's going to be solved with minor solutions, it's going to be major solutions, whatever those might be. But so how are those people going to deal with sigma? It's kind of like, I look at it as if you were on an island, okay, with 100 people stranded, with enough water for 66 people. And then you're told, form groups and make it work. So you're in a closed system, you know, and you don't have access to desalinate water around you, although that might, you know, so you got to start figuring out these solutions. But you are not going to survive. You're going to have to start doing reality TV, kicking people off the island or whatever. But that is literally the challenge that we are facing right now in the San Joaquin Valley. Now, within the Friant Division, I think we're probably at about 300,000 acre feet of overdraft. Within, if you take all the million-plus acres that are in Friant Division, and we're going to figure out a way to balance that out. But there are a lot of people that have no access to surface water.
So you didn't give me an answer. What would you do to improve that grid? Is it really just going to be demand management, coming up with clever ways to do demand management?
So let me say this. Demand management is only going to help if you have people stop farming. Because we are in a closed basin in the San Joaquin Valley. Every acre foot that you conserve might help the farmer that conserved it, but it's recharging less groundwater. And ultimately, it is not reducing the total demand for water in the system. And same with recycling. It might help the person that gets recycled water, but that acre foot you recycled was going to go to the San Joaquin River and meet an outflow objective that now we have to release out of Friant Dam to meet. And it's like that on every basin. So I'm not saying conservation recycling don't do them. We should do them. We're going to do them. But the net deficit of the water balance stays the same. So we need to find ways to, it's a mass balance. You're looking at the water that you otherwise lose in the wet years, and you need to find a way to capture that and convey it to new groundwater recharge locations. And you know, so one of the things that we have to do is look at our conveyance systems. We've got the Frank Kern Canal, we've got the Delta Mendota Canal, California Aqueduct, and there's a lot of land that does not have access to surface water because of conveyance. That's step number one. That would have been funded to a large extent or fully with Prop 3. And now folks will have to find a different way to do. But upgrading the conveyance system is number one. But then you got to find out how you're going to put water in that conveyance system.
Okay, well, let me move along to Ashley here, because she's doing a lot of work in this. I mean, what you described, we're fully aware of that. You know, the bottom line is mass balance is a problem. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of push to basically use every drop as carefully as possible. But we're at a time where here's the state board going through its water quality control plan. I mean, we're considering, we have the San Joaquin River restoration plan. What always strikes me is that the environment is a constraint in these systems rather than a partner in this system. And I know in your organization you're trying to shift that paradigm so it's a partner in it. So give me some examples, and hopefully less dystopian examples than Jason just gave, of what we might actually do to actually engage the environment in the infrastructure itself.
Yeah, so when we think about this issue for the San Joaquin Valley, which we agree is very serious. I mean, it's a monumental task, I think, to successfully implement Sigma in San Joaquin Valley. We think about the opportunities that floodwaters present. So The state is not really prepared for the kind of floods years and the wet years we're going to experience. Both, so we need to think about it in terms of mitigating flooding downstream community risk, but we also want to make sure we take advantage of the huge opportunity that those floodwaters present. And though that, you know, as you described, the season's getting shorter, we're going to have fewer, bigger storms, and we have to figure out how to capture that water quickly. And the way we're currently set up in our grid, we can't do that. So what sustainable conservation has been advocating is to, you know, in a sense, mimic what nature used to do. And the water used to come out of all those rivers and spread out across the land, and it was really one giant wetland with high water tables. So what we're saying is let's do that again, but in a more managed way, directing the water to the soils that are good, sandy soils for percolation, and there's a variety. There's some really creative things happening in the San Joaquin Valley to maximize recharge, whether it's taking, you know, not planting annual crops and using fallow land, in some cases looking at using permanent crops and flooding those that are on good sandy soils and crops that can handle water. Private basins where farmers are taking a certain percentage of land out of production to build a private basin to capture water, and subtile drains and others. So to do that, you've got to, as you said, we need canal infrastructure to move that water to the places where it can be recharged. But we also need to remember that we have natural infrastructure that's also equally important. And so the idea of reconnecting to our floodplains and allowing our floodplains to slow down that water, protect downstream communities, accomplish recharge, and provide very much needed habitat, particularly in areas like the San Joaquin River and the tributaries. We think that's a very important component. And so if I can just speak to a couple of policy things that I think need to be thought about to make this happen. One is the beneficial use issue. There needs to be clarity about when recharge is a beneficial use, because just recharging water is not a beneficial use. It really depends on what the purpose of that recharge is for. So right now, if you're recharging to store it, to then later pump it out to use it above ground, that's a beneficial use. But if you're recharging groundwater for a non-extractive use, maybe water quality, subsidence, it's not clear when that's a beneficial use or not, and it's on a case-by-case basis decision by the state board. We have to give clarity, because to make the kind of investments that are needed to be made in canal infrastructure, floodplain restoration, and others, you need to have some certainty about what kind of recharge you can do. So that's one issue. And then also we have issues around water rights. One, we just need to modernize our water rights system so we know who has what. In addition, we need to be able to facilitate, when we do have these peak flood flows that come very quickly, we need to facilitate the ability to capture those above the level of what fish and wildlife need. And so the Governor Brown's administration did have a temporary water rights permit program. It's uncertain if that will continue under the Newsom administration, but we think it should. And then in addition, the state board has started a process to establish a streamlined process to get a permanent water right for peak flood flows. And they want to establish a threshold above which those waters could be taken. And that threshold has to be protective of fish and wildlife. We think that needs to be done regionally, because the threshold needs to be higher in the San Joaquin Valley tributaries than it does, let's say, in Tulare Basin, where you have, you've lost that interconnection between groundwater and rivers. So,
Terrific. Kurt, I want to come to you because we often look to the Yuba County, Yuba Water Agency, sorry. Somehow I'll chase it out of my, the Yuba Water Agency as an example of genuinely integrated water management and the advantages that come with integrated water management. You do everything, you're doing everything now from headwater restoration work, hydropower work, flood control, I should call it flood management, the core is here, flood management, and along with all the water supply issues and habitat issues itself. We often look to this as a model. In thinking about it, that you have a grid that you manage within it. Can we scale this? Is it just going to work only because of the Yuba Accord that happened in the Yuba River with its unique circumstances? Or is this something we might actually be able to scale up, even down into Jason's playground, of his fun place to work? Can we scale up?
So before I go there, I have a request for Alan. Next time, can you issue some visors? Anyway, we've been blessed that the Yuba County Water Agency, that's our official name. Our nickname is Yuba Water Agency, so you're fine there, Jeff. And Yuba County pretty much contains the whole watershed. There's some upper parts of the watershed and stuff, but a good part of it. And so we have our facilities on the North Yuba, and as Jeff said, it's pretty well integrated. And the other thing that's, I think, led us to have such great success is really good leadership from boards, from staff, to really smart consultants to see what the challenges of the future are. I will admit it's a lot easier to do something where you have one county board of supervisors, you don't have a lot of cities involved, and even then, it is a big challenge. And sometimes your own customers can be the most difficult part of the challenges we found out with the Accord, but it takes a lot of collaboration, it takes a lot of good data, science, interest base, and really bringing all the parties together. It's a lot easier where you have a watershed within one organization, but can it be duplicated? I looked at what the American River has done to some extent with its water form, how it's approaching the voluntary settlement agreements for Bay Delta. I think it can be done. I think it's more of a challenge for the leadership to collaborate, look at all the interests, and find a way within their constraints and their interests to move forward.
Yeah, okay. And that segues to you, Jennifer. I mean, you think I'm going to ask you about water fix. I'm not. There's something broader to that, and it comes out of Kurt's thing. We have this grid, and this grid is made by and run for people. People often with very, very competing interests. And I know you are in the thick of it without having to reveal any of the details on this. We seem to be shifting, and I want to hear your perspective on this, shifting away from the old traditional approach to water system development and management, which was some people with some power and influence decided what they wanted. They went and they built it with the help of the federal and state government, and pretty much ran over people, and then they were sued. I mean, so inevitably there was litigation. But we seem to be shifting. I want to get your perspective as we go to think about modernizing the water grid. Since you're in the thick of this, we're looking at the voluntary settlement agreements. They may well be a model if they are successful in the next 20 days, 25 days, for what we should do in general. Kind of the approach where these are negotiated settlements which are going to be, as we all know, wildly imperfect. And they have warts and all, they'll be wildly imperfect, but they may be the future. And I want to hear your perspective on that, since you're in the thick of this with WaterFix and the Water Quality Control Board's, Water Quality Plan that's coming from the State Water Board.
Okay. So thanks for having me. I think there's kind of three ways I think about the grid. One is the actual hard infrastructure, and for that, I find it interesting that pretty much everybody on every panel, including Ellen, this morning have all been talking about the need for conveyance, and that's exactly what WaterFix is attempting to do, and we should talk about that because I think it's an important part of the grid. But there's also the part of the grid of the existing infrastructure in terms of how we utilize existing infrastructure in a way that allows us to be more flexible and responsive to this volatility we're all talking about. And then lastly, and I think most related to the voluntary agreements, are this ability that we have to have decision support science and the ability to accept uncertainty because we will need to be flexible and we will need to be able to respond to conditions where we can estimate what the trends will be, but we really don't know exactly what it'll be, and so we need to be able to create mechanisms that allow us to make decisions, not necessarily in real time as in day by day, but to be flexible over time in a way that helps us meet our objectives from a water supply perspective, from an ecosystem perspective, and to adapt over time to what we learn from our science programs, and hopefully what the last panel is talking about kind of comes to life in terms of really changing data into information. And so I think that's really where, to me, the grid, having a little elbow room around how we utilize this stuff is really, really key, regardless of if we build or don't build more hard infrastructure.
So I do want to follow up with the more difficult question on the grid. And this is why ask questions you know the answer to. But do you think we are well designed for it? Let me give you a specific example. If you were starting from scratch, would you have a separate Central Valley project and a state water project? Would they really be two separate things? Because they're a real grid, and they're connected all the way from the Trinity River to San Diego. Would you do it that way again?
No.
Okay, so, so I have to have one difficult question for you. We had a wonderful discussion here when Jeff, last year, when Jeff Keitlinger, who's the head of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, recommended dropping the name Southern California from the title of Metropolitan Water District and uniting the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. Why not do that?
Well, maybe we will eventually. I mean, I think Kurt spoke to the idea that some things have been easier on Yuba because you have more of a streamlining of who's in charge. So, and just what needs to be coordinated. And you know, there are obviously very coordinated operations between the two projects, and regulations express themselves differently, different leaders, personalities, et cetera. And so I don't think one way is better than the other in terms of whether it be state project or Central Valley project, but rather if it were a unified project, I think it could be more efficient. And that goes not just in the planning exercises that sometimes are frustrating, but really in how we share water and how that gets moved around the state for water rights and water supply, for flood protection, and for ecosystems, and having a lot more flexibility. Again, I think to me that is the name of the game. That's what WaterFix is all about, is having that flexibility, having regulations that don't hamstring us. We're also working on a contract amendment to really have water management tools that allow us to more effectively move state water project water from one user to another. That is, you know, a huge upgrade in terms of the movement of the water in a way that is cost effective and actually provides the water where it's needed.
You mean like a grid? Yes.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're talking about. So, I mean, in the interest of time, I want to move on to the second question. I'm going to end up starting with you, Jason, and all of this. The defeat of Proposition 3, I don't want to do a postmortem on that. And the worst thing you can do is a postmortem would say, well, if they just designed a better bond, it would have passed. Doesn't matter. It's done. It is probably an indication of bond fatigue. It's legitimate. We have almost $40 billion worth of bonds for water and water-related issues that have come up since the start of 2000s. So one has to worry about that. It might be the end of bond fatigue, or the beginning of bond fatigue, at least water bond fatigue. So it's Plan B, and we think about Plan B. So Jason, I want to start with you. There was a lot of money in that, or substantial amount of money, which really would have helped for you guys, particularly on the conveyance side of this. And of course, there's money in Proposition 1 and Proposition 68 that's still available. But when you go back to your users and you have to talk to them about what you're going to do, we have to reduce the use of water. You said 300,000 acre feet, I think, or something on that. We have to reduce the use of water, and we've got to pay for all this upgrade of our infrastructure, particularly the Friant Kern Canal. How are you dealing with that with your users, and what creative solutions are you offering them?
Well, so far, every call I get, I just say, well, they're still counting votes.
That's a good strategy. It's working for the Democrats.
No, I think that, you know, there was a lot of money in there to go through my agency in Proposition 3, and it wasn't all, in fact, probably less than half of it would have, or even less than a third of it would have benefited directly to the Friant Division. I think what we had recognized was we need to actually have some money to upgrade the conveyance system, the grid in the valley. And when the bond was being put together, it was looked at as, you know, how can we make sure that the money gets put in where it needs to go to fix the problems and to get the water when it's available to where it needs to be, and it's the best strategy to funnel that through the state of California. And you know, I think the collective feeling on that was no. And I happen to be CEO of an agency that covers every county from Madera down to Kern, and we're a public agency, and we can implement that transparently. And so that was the decision in that regard. I do want to address, though, moving forward, how do we invest in the infrastructure we need? And it comes back to, I think, of the question you asked Jennifer. Should we merge the CVP and the State Water Project? Well, we've kind of tied ourselves in knots in California with our complex system. And CVP water users like us would say, well, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have to pay a whole lot more money because of the way DWR operates it. And then we're going to get in all these arguments on water allocations and priorities that are just going to get complicated enough to make it take too long, and we get a switch in politics, and then we move on. And we've been in that cycle now for several decades. And it's no different when we talk about investing in new infrastructure. WaterFix, good example. We talked, WaterFix is a project that would allow more flexibility to deliver more water when it's available in a more environmentally friendly way. However, one of the main barriers is all of the water agencies. I mean, Bureau of Reclamation has over 300 contracts for water. It all looks different than the way the state does it. And we open ourselves up to so many arguments, debates, and vulnerabilities. The environmental community, those that would choose to, hey, let's find a way to kill this project, they have so many buttons to choose, it's crazy. And it goes for every single project that we want to build. And I don't think funding would be a problem if we could find a way that the people who are going to put their money there will know they will get a benefit for it, and other people who maybe just are fine with what they have know that they won't end up with less water. And that, to me, that's a major institutional barrier that we've got to overcome.
Okay, that's interesting. Kurt, let me transition to you on this. Our entire conversation is really focused principally on scarcity, water scarcity. But we're reminded that one of the signatures of change that we're seeing going on is increasing volatility, so that you have to basically balance flood management with water supply management. So you guys do that, but all of us who read the Central Valley Flood Plan looked at that price tag, and we're very impressed with the number of zeros within it. And the fact is that Ellen Hannock coined the term some time ago, fiscal orphans, that flood management is a fiscal orphan. Although there's new help from the federal government, it's not going to solve the problem. So I'm just curious your thoughts when we start to think about, particularly Central Valley, management of the Central Valley, but it doesn't really matter, it's just about anywhere, this fiscal orphan and how we deal with that part of our infrastructure.
So how Yuba has dealt with that is to say, how can we, as one of the poorest counties in the state, find a revenue source? And we were fortunate that we have a lot of water supply at sometimes when the drought, and then we have too much with the flood, and we managed to work a series of laws for transfers, and so for many years, 2-3 decades, we survived off of transfer revenues, and we were able to put those, reinvest them into our mission. And our mission is primarily water supply and flood protection. I think having that co-equal goal out there really helps us with all this. And so where are we now is after 50 years, we've got the generation benefit from the project. Unfortunately, that's a lot less than it was 10 years ago. And so we're looking at how do we sustain our transfer of water and our generation benefits. And there's not much we can do on the generation side, but one of the concerns that we have is just how do we go forward with the Bay Delta process. And we put the Yuba Accord together, which was just a marvelous way of creating a win-win-win. We were able to take care of the environment with in-stream flow requirements. We were able to sustain our water transfers by taking that increased flow and being able to transfer that. And then we were able to work with our own farmers to put contracts together to make all this work. A pretty unique situation, but now we're faced with Bay Delta and a 55% unimpaired flow. It would wipe that out. It potentially takes the revenues away for us to work with like our Blue Forest project up in the upper watershed. It potentially takes away revenues to build the secondary spillway, which really kind of gets at the heart of your question there, Jeff. And one of the things I look at is we have an existing infrastructure. Our challenge is how do we make better use of that infrastructure with very limited funds? And we've chosen with a secondary spillway to improve flood protection, but also like Lake Mendocino, look at ways to improve our water supply. As Sherry said, we're really good at forecasting no storms for a while, and if we do that, then we can retain that water above the flood pool and move forward. And so it gets back to how do we work as a state? And I think the challenge that we have is to really focus on interest-based collaborative settlements where we have good leadership that's not stuck in a silo, that's not stuck in this is my regulatory area, but looking for a way of how do we balance all the issues across the board and find a way to make it work in this very challenging environment.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, while you were speaking there, Jennifer raised her hand and said, "We'll buy it." So, she'll pay for it. And that comes to you, Jennifer. when we sit, I have a very direct question for you, which is an awkward one, but.
If I could, you know, the importance of the bond funds has been absolutely critical. I mean, the flood bond, the water supply bonds, we've used those to leverage our local funds, and without that, it's not possible. Okay. Anyway.
It was cutting out, yeah, and bonds are really important. So Jennifer, let's come back to you. I mean, we all know WaterFix, for example, has been, user pays, it's been from day one, that's been the same. There's a bunch of externalized costs that are going to have to be dealt with, and particularly habitat and things like that. But again, WaterFix is going to kick in a lot of this. But it's how to pay for all of this stuff, and this sort of, Phil Eisenberg is here and has regularly pointed out that Californians want everything and somebody else to pay for it. And I don't know whether you're going to run into those constraints, but let me give you an example. Who's going to pay for Oroville Dam? The repairs on Oroville Dam. Right now, the federal government's not being a very good partner. It's a state water project. It was just ratepayers are going to have to come up with that money.
So before I answer that, I just want to say I represent 27 public water agencies. Metropolitan's the largest, but definitely not the only. And each of those public water agencies are making investments in their own regions and backyards. I think Ellen pointed that out, that a lot of cities and agricultural areas are doing innovative things, and they pay for that. They fund those. They also pay for all of the costs associated with the state water project. I don't think that the costs have been fully sorted out on Oroville, and so I can't really speak exactly to that, but I think we do not seek others or the taxpayers to pay for the state water project facilities. We have always paid for those facilities, and that the WaterFix standard that the beneficiary pays is consistent with everything else we've ever always done on the state water project. I do want to point out that the WaterFix project is the most cost-effective way to stabilize water supplies for the state water project. The price tag is always brought up, but when you compare anything else that could be done regionally or on the project, it is by far the most cost-effective, which is why we're pursuing it. It's the most responsible way to stabilize the water grid for the state water project. And it doesn't just benefit the state water project. I think Jason will acknowledge that there's benefits even outside of the CVP to having improved conveyance. There are benefits to the environment by having the ability to be more flexible. There are benefits to being able to respond to salinity and sea level rise, to the flashiness of the water and what is that safe amount you can take when you have a condensed season of high flows on the Sacramento River in a way that that we can take that safely. And that's what this project's all about. That's why we're pursuing it. We are planning to pay for it. And there are 5 north of Delta water agencies that are state water project contractors, and they are not going to be paying for it. That's another piece of the contract amendment we're working on.
Okay, so I need to move along so we can get to lunch. So Ashley, I've left you with the most difficult question of the fiscal orphans that we're dealing with, and that is the environmental side of this. That was one of the big setbacks with Proposition 3, is there was a lot of money for environmental restoration, purchase of flows. I mean, there really was quite extraordinary. There still is a lot of money out there. I mean, there's Proposition 68 and Proposition 1, which we haven't spent down. But this is a public resource, it's a public trust resource, and we just haven't figured out how to pay for this within our projects. So I'm just sort of curious as to how you do this. I mean, or what your views on this, and unfortunately we have to be fairly brief about this, but your views on how we might change the way we approach paying for the environmental issues, both the cost and trying to restore the environment.
Like that's the $64 million question.
And you have 2 minutes.
And a lot more than that. So the bonds that we've passed over the years have been great and been very helpful for funding very badly needed restoration work, but they're certainly not sufficient. And we really do have to figure out some stable, long-term funding source for the environment, because the needs that we have, whether it be in-stream fish barriers, passage to fish barriers, or floodplain restoration, or the list goes on. The needs are huge, and bonds are not going to cut it. Even if Prop 3 had passed, it had a lot of important money, but not enough for what we are facing. So whether it's a public goods charge or some other kind of vehicle, we do need to figure out a long-term stable funding source. I would just add, kind of looking at it a little bit differently, We do have funding, as you said, for some restoration, so I think it's pretty critical that that money gets spent as cost effectively as possible. And one of the things Sustainable Conservation's been very involved with is how do you create much simpler permitting processes to get these restoration projects done. Our environmental regulations do not distinguish between restoration and development projects. You got to go through all the same processes and hoops, and that is a very costly, complicated, and long process. So we have been developing programmatic permits in cooperation with the agencies so that all of the environmental protection measures, everything that's needed is known up front. The projects can be designed to that, and they can go through much more quickly. And that will result of more of the money that we do have being spent on actual improvements to environmental conditions.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I just want to point out that, for example, Eco-Restore, we estimate to be $1 billion worth of restoration. The state water project contractors are paying for that. We estimate that $100 million annually is being collected from the Central Valley project contractors and the state water project contractors for science and research. We're paying for that. There's actually a lot of money on the table. How are we using it? I think that's a better question to be asking ourselves. How are we using the money that's on the table before we start talking about needing more? And I'm not saying we don't, but I think we just gloss over what we're already spending on, and are they really addressing the priorities that we have today?
Point well taken. Okay, Jason, you go over to the resources agency, you step into the elevator after you get your cute little name tag, and you step in, and in steps the governor, the new governor, the taller, younger, handsome governor. And he steps in there, and you got him for 16 floors. Go.
Wow, Governor, fancy meeting you here. I'm Jason Phillips with Friant Water Authority. I'm responsible for delivering water to over 1 million acres in the San Joaquin Valley, very productive acres. And you know, you've probably heard that there's a water crisis brewing in the valley, and if we don't take major action soon, there's going to be land retirement forced on us of probably between 1 to 2 million acres. Hey, wait a second, Governor, why did you just push 5? You don't.
Good answer, Jennifer. I'm going to cut you off unless you.
No.
Unless you grab him.
Bear with me, Governor. Real quick, we are not prepared in the San Joaquin Valley to deal with this. What we desperately need is a strategic plan for how to balance water conditions in the San Joaquin Valley in the next 15 years. Would you be willing to take a meeting to talk about partnering with us to develop that plan?
Jennifer, you got him.
Governor, congratulations. As you move forward in water for California, remember that flexibility is the name of the game. We need it for the existing grid, we need grid improvements, and we need the ability to use decision to support science in order to operate those as best we can. And I think you just ran into my friend AG on your way up, and I agree with him when he says, don't wait for the perfect plan, we're going to suffer every year that we delay.
That's a nice callback to an earlier one. That's good. Okay, Kurt, you're from an obscure little water agency in Northern California.
Governor, I'm going to resist the overwhelming urge to push the stop button and have a real conversation. Anyway, what I would say is that your ability to accomplish your water agenda is going to be largely dependent on who you appoint to director positions and board positions. And I really ask you to give some real thought to appointing proven leaders that have expertise in their field, champions that want to champion projects that go beyond the regulatory requirements in their departments and find comprehensive interest-based solutions that take people out of their silos and provide an overall solution.
Hey, it was great. That was a terrific answer. Not what I expected. That's perfect. Ashley, you got him. He's yours.
Governor Newsom, very nice to meet you. I want to tell you I was really impressed with how you jumped right into the job the day after the election and sent a letter to the state board asking them to delay their decision so that the settlement negotiations had a chance. I want to urge you to stay involved in those settlement negotiation discussions to make sure they happen and we come out with a real solution that we can measure with outcomes for fish and wildlife while manageable also for communities and for the local economies. And this is very important for you to do because if this does not get solved now, you are going to have escalated conflict over water during your administration when you have many important goals, including the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which, as you know, was the first major water law in 100 years, but just passing legislation doesn't make it happen. It's a huge lift, and you really got to double down on providing support to implement it successfully. Ding!
All right. So with that, let's give a round of applause to our fabulous panel. So we've got about 10 minutes, a little more than 10 minutes, and I'd like to go ahead and solicit questions. And for some reason, I can see. Maybe it's my low brow ridge here, my Neanderthal brow ridge, so I can see. So let's see if we got questions out there. If we don't, I'll ask them, and you won't like them. Where's our microphone? Either of these, whoever, that man right there.
How do delta tunnels fix the delta?
Well, obviously that's you, Jennifer. How do the delta tunnels fix the delta?
So there's no silver bullet in the delta, so I don't want to come off as saying they quote unquote fix the delta. But what they do is provide a couple things. First of all, the flexibility to move water in the delta in a way that can be responsive to the conditions in the delta versus just having one single point of diversion. They also help to improve the ability to have a more natural flow in the South Delta, where entrainment impacts have been of concern for many years. They are also located at an elevation that is adaptable for climate change. And I think in general, just having the ability to really move different knobs in response to what we really don't know is our future. So that's the purpose of those.
Great. Another question. Now I am going to do it. Right here.
I'll give it back to you.
You can't keep that microphone.
I just, I don't want to bend over. I always give the mic back. Spreck Rosecrans, Restore Hetchetchy. Simple question about markets. Jeff, you said, hey, it's like the electrical grid. It's not. We don't know where these electrons come from. We know where our water comes from. Quick example, Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency tried to negotiate a water transfer from Yuba, just a tiny little thing. They gave up. Board members are sitting around the room. How can this possibly be so complicated? I'll posit water use is not as efficient everywhere. And how can we improve our grid and get markets so they can really work?
So that's the question. How can we improve our grid and get markets so they really work?
Well, I can speak for the State Water Project. Like I said, we're working on a contract amendment that allows us to better move State Water Project water amongst ourselves so that, for example, in years when a contractor south of the Delta would have been going to Yuba County and looking to transfer that through the Delta, they can instead look to another State Water Project contractor south of the Delta and try to be more efficient within that service area. So that's one way that we're working on that. I think there's some kind of programmatic permitting that could be helpful on the transfers, but I think collectively, don't we just need to start to recognize that we need to be able to move this around, and there's some people that don't want to see that happen, and we got to figure out what to do with them. That's from you last night, Jeff.
I have said it before. There's no problem in water that isn't solved by a few strategic funerals, is what I think.
I didn't say that. You said that.
I said that, but you meant it. There's questions over there.
Thank you. I want to pick up where Ashley left off with the kind of unusual, if not unprecedented step of the governor-elect and governor signing a letter urging the water board to delay action on the water quality control plan update. And I'm interested in the panel's perspectives on kind of what do you read into that? Is that a good thing? Does it mean we can get to a good outcome? And was it a wise decision, maybe? Any?
I'll go first.
I was going to say, all of them can probably answer this.
It was a very welcome announcement. I think that there's great possibility to get together in a voluntary agreement. Quite frankly, I think we need some leadership, and at the governor's level is really welcome to say, I want all you guys to get together. It's almost like locking people in a room and saying, I'm not going to let you out until you find a solution to all this stuff. But I think we need a little bit more leadership and focus on let's get something done here, and I think this is a step in the right direction.
You and Jennifer. You first.
Sure.
Ashley first.
So sustainable conservation is not in the room in these settlement negotiations, but we are big proponents of them because we think that Our fish populations are really in very serious condition, and increased flows are important, but we think habitat restoration is also important, and we feel like all the strategies need to be brought to bear at once. And so that's one reason. And the second is I just fear kind of endless litigation if there isn't some kind of a settlement agreement that is pushed. So I'm not sure what it means that he did that, but I was happy that he did it to make sure we give it the best chance it has to happen. I do think that if it does come out, it's got to have sort of outcomes that can be measured and monitored for fish and wildlife because it's such a critical issue.
Jason?
Yeah, I think from the water user's perspective, it was welcome, very welcome to see engagement that quickly. I think it was the right decision. The regulatory sledgehammer approach for the past 30 years has failed miserably. And a lot of us are punished, are suffering because of it, and the fish are not doing better. We need settlement agreements where the focus is how do you restore specifically to the objectives that you're shooting for, and not just say, hey, we've got leverage to hit the sledgehammer. So it was welcome.
Jennifer, I think you're in the room on these discussions, so there's probably a limit of what you can say, but...
Well, I'll just say it was welcome. We also were part of a coalition letter to ask for the delay, and I think it's not a delay in action, it's a delay. This stuff is not easy. It's not as simple as unimpaired flows. It is way more complicated, and I think that giving us a little bit more time is going to allow for something that is durable, is sustainable from an environmental perspective, and that hopefully will reduce litigation. And I think those are all really important concepts, and I appreciate that the board is giving us a little bit more time in order to try to sort this out, because I'm very optimistic about it.
Another question?
Yes, Pierce 1, Irvine Ranch. The big question in the room is my county is very good at recycling water, so we're recycling better than half the water that would otherwise go to the ocean. We have pretty good conservation programs. When is enough on reduced reliance on the Delta, and how is that distributed to the people who have reduced reliance and those that haven't? It's a somewhat different concept than what I heard when we passed the 7XX, and it's a very key thing. So the people that can talk about reduced reliance on the Delta, I'd appreciate if they would kind of address that.
We're looking at you, Jennifer.
I'm just so angry right now about this topic, but I'll try to stay calm. I think that I think it is well recognized by most of us, and I think Ellen actually pointed this out, that all of you within the Delta service area have been making the investments to reduce reliance. And this myth that somehow down in Southern California and throughout the valley, there's this wasteful use of water all over the place, and that needs to be reined in from people in Sacramento is ridiculous. And I think the facts are there. And I think that we need more people to stand up and say, here's what we're doing. I think we heard about it from Inland Empire. We're hearing about it from you. And all of our members, all 24 South of Delta members, are doing things locally to reduce their reliance. And it needs to be better recognized. We need to get past the myth. So I think the more you can stand up and say it, the better. But I don't know when enough will be enough. And I just got to stop there.
During the drought.
Yeah, okay. How do you really feel? No, tell us. Okay, we have time for one more question. One more question.
Thank you. Peter Fisk, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. So another topic that wasn't mentioned at all today, seismic. Do you feel like our grid, our water grid, is prepared to withstand a major event that is inevitable geologically?
So Kurt, the Foothill Fault Zone runs right through your neighborhood.
Yeah, and there are processes for analyzing the maximum credible earthquake. We have gone through that. We have done finite element analysis on our dams, our gates, and have determined that the structure is adequately designed for the science that we have today. And we're looking at future improvements too. The secondary spillway, while it's designed for flood protection, is going to be a big safety improvement for us and dam safety enhancement, because we'll be able to release more water from behind the dam quicker in case something happens. And I think we're in a pretty good position.
Jennifer, this actually does come to you because the State Water Project is so vast and so long. Some people have argued that the question of outage in the Delta due to an earthquake is actually small relative to the outage that can occur elsewhere in that system, particularly on San Andreas in the south. How well prepared are you guys for outages from earthquakes?
Well, I think the Sisk Dam has been identified for quite some time as needing to have a seismic retrofit, but the department has been working on some of the Southern California reservoirs and has been upgrading those. So I think the risk is known and we're trying to work through it, but we have the same sorts of hurdles we have with anything related to the State Water Project, in that there's just blanket opposition to any sort of improvement on the state project, even if it's in the name of public safety. WaterFix, of course, I didn't mention, but also has a huge seismic value, both under an emergency condition, but also, long-term ability to continue to provide water to 27 million Californians. So we're working on it.
I think that's the answer to all of these. Okay, with that, the grid. We're going to hear a lot about the grid in the Newsom administration, we hope, discussions of the grid. And in fact, at PPIC, we've been touting this now for some years. We need to think about it as a grid. I want to thank all four of our panelists today who thought about it as a grid and talked about it as a grid and act on it as a grid. And I want to thank all of you for coming today to listen to us. I believe Ellen is going to finish up with the thank yous, but from all of us on this stage, thanks. Thanks for listening to us.
So I am really what stands between you and lunch, which is right outside. Just before dropping the mic, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here. And thank you to our wonderful moderators and panelists. And thank you to our sponsors for making this event possible. And also a special shout out to Carlos Torres, our new Water Center administrator. You could stand up for a moment. This is his baptism by fire in organizing a big event, and he did a pretty awesome job. He had some great help from PPIC colleagues. And please, if you want to know anything more about PPIC, find one of us and ask us questions. And if you want to support us, we're happy to tell you about how to do that too. Go grab some lunch and have fun and network and enjoy. Thank you.